It started like something simple. Chicken roasting in the oven, jazz humming softly in the background, and the kind of dim lighting Talia always said made people feel at home. I stood in front of the dining room mirror, adjusting the collar of the dark green button-down she'd bought me 2 birthdays ago. The one she said brought out the seriousness in my eyes. "It's just dinner," I told myself, straightening my sleeves. But even then, something in my chest felt off. Like my body knew what my mind hadn't caught up to yet. Talia greeted me with a peck on the cheek, her smile too thin, too polite. "Glad you made it," she said, like I was a guest in my own marriage. The table was set for 6, her parents Frederick and Joelle at the ends, her sister Brielle beside her, and me at the other side like a piece that didn't quite fit the puzzle. There was red wine already breathing, cloth napkins folded too perfectly, and the kind of tension that makes the air feel like it's pressing down on your skin. We sat. We passed dishes. We made small talk, the kind that barely scratched the surface. I mentioned a recent trip to San Francisco, and Joelle blinked as if I'd said I'd just come back from Pluto. Brielle scrolled on her phone between bites. And Frederick? He kept eyeing me like I'd left fingerprints on something sacred. Then it happened, so fast and yet so deliberate, like they'd rehearsed it. Frederick put his fork down, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and stood. He was still chewing, but his eyes were already burning. "You know what?" he said, voice louder than it needed to be. "I'm tired of pretending. You don't belong here." The room froze. I set my fork down quietly. "Excuse me." "You heard me," he snapped, pointing across the table. "You're not one of us. You never were. You're just a lowlife. Uneducated trash who got lucky and tricked my daughter into marrying beneath her." A sharp chill cut through me, colder than any winter I'd ever known. But what made it worse, what made the words stick, was the silence that followed. Not a gasp. Not a protest. Nothing. Joelle didn't even blink. She nodded like she'd been waiting for the cue. "Honestly, Gerald, it's embarrassing. The way you speak. The way you dress. The fact that you still try to act like you fit in our world." Talia should have married better. I turned to my wife. Talia, the woman I built Sunday mornings with. The woman I shared dreams, fears, and a king-sized bed with. I looked at her, hoping, begging for something. Anything. But she stared at her plate like she couldn't see the fire in the room. She said nothing. Not even a whisper of defense. Her silence wasn't neutral. It was betrayal shaped like indifference. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't part of the family. I was part of a performance. One they'd grown tired of pretending to enjoy. I breathed slowly, gathering every ounce of restraint I had. I could have shouted. Could have flipped the table and told them about the contracts I'd closed last quarter, the companies I'd bought out, the staff I employed. I could have shoved numbers and success and Forbes articles down their throats until they choked on their own assumptions. But I didn't. Instead, I adjusted my collar, stood to my full height, and looked each of them in the eye. My heart pounded, not from rage, but from clarity. I wasn't just being kicked out of a dinner. I was being released from a cage I hadn't realized I was in. I turned to Talia one last time. "You're really not going to say anything?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes dropped. Silence again. So I gave them the simplest word in the world. The one that said everything I didn't need to explain. "Okay." And just like that, I walked out. No final toast. No dramatic monologue. Just the sound of my shoes on their polished hardwood floor, my breath steady, my steps sure. I didn't take my coat. I didn't take my pride. Because they hadn't broken it. The night air outside greeted me like an old friend. Cool, honest, unpretentious. I got into my car and drove in silence, letting the quiet wrap around me like armor. What they didn't know, what none of them even bothered to ask, was that I had options. Power. Money. Influence. They thought I was a charity case with a clean haircut. They didn't know I earned $45 million last fiscal year. Not inherited. Not gifted. Built. Engineered. Every cent etched from years of sleepless nights and risks they wouldn't even know how to spell. But I didn't need to prove that to them. Because anyone who could look you in the eye and strip you of dignity without blinking didn't deserve the truth anyway. By the time I got home. My real home, the one I bought, furnished, and paid taxes on, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. They thought they served me humiliation on a silver platter. But what they really handed me was a blank slate. And I was about to draw something they'd never be invited to see. By morning, I was in Florida. Not just passing through. Not running or retreating. but exactly where I had planned to be before last night's performance masquerading as a dinner. The road had been long, but I made the drive in one stretch, no music, no podcasts, just the hum of the engine and the thoughts tumbling through my head like dominoes. When the gates to my beachfront home opened, that hum quieted. The world outside didn't matter here. This place was mine. 5 bedrooms, minimalist design, all white stone and glass, with clean lines and panoramic windows that let the Atlantic in like an old friend. I bought it outright, no mortgage, no co-signers. Just me, a wire transfer, and the kind of balance you don't talk about over dinner with people who assume your worth begins and ends with the name on your college diploma. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, sealing off the noise from everything that came before. Dropped my bag in the entryway, kicked off my shoes, and for the first time in a long time, I breathed, deeply, fully. The air smelled like salt and sunshine, like the kind of peace you earn, not find. I walked barefoot across polished wood floors and headed straight for the back deck, where the ocean waited like it always did, patient and endless. I poured a cup of coffee, black, strong, hot, and sat in the teak chair that faced the horizon. From here, the sky looked wider, like it was making space for something new. My phone buzzed, but I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to. I already knew who it was. Miles, my assistant, punctual to a fault. Instead, I sipped and listened to the waves. They didn't ask me to explain myself. They didn't demand degrees or pedigrees. They didn't insult me at dinner tables dressed in judgment. They whispered what my wife never did. You made it. On your own. And no one can take that from you. Eventually, I did pick up the phone, because the world I built doesn't slow down just because people showed me their true colors. Morning, Miles, I said, voice steady. Boss, welcome back. First off, the Dubai investor wants to meet Friday instead of next Tuesday. He's trying to expedite the deal. Good. Move him to the afternoon slot. I want time to breathe. Understood. You've also got the press preview for the fintech rollout on Thursday, morning coverage, and the exclusive with Tech Insider. I nodded, already shifting into the headspace that felt like home. Rafiq confirmed the Miami rental acquisition. Signed this morning. We now own 72 units across 3 buildings. Construction finishes in 10 weeks. I allowed myself a slow grin. Perfect. Miles paused. Also, your attorney followed up on the paperwork and the prenup. He said to let you know, you're untouchable. That part made me chuckle. Not out of pride. Out of clarity. Talia's family thought I came to them with open palms. What they never realized was that I had built an empire they'd never be able to understand, let alone touch. I didn't leave that dinner empty-handed. I walked out with everything that mattered: dignity, freedom, control. And the law? It had my back. I ended the call and leaned back, letting the sun warm my face. The deck overlooked a private slice of sand most people only saw in travel brochures. It stretched out like a promise I kept to myself. Every palm tree, every stone tile, every grain of wood in this place was mine. Designed, paid for, protected. I wasn't some lucky guy who stumbled into wealth. I was a builder. And I built quietly. I built while they were laughing, while they were dismissing me, while they were bragging about inheritance checks and old money that taught them nothing about earning. I finished my coffee and walked through the house, past the abstract art I actually understood, the books I read twice, the kitchen where I made every meal with my own hands. No staff, no chef, just me and my peace. I wasn't healing. I had already healed. I was simply removing the last traces of noise from a life that was already too full to make room for people who never cared to understand it. Later that evening, after signing off on a few calls and reading the revised Dubai term sheet, I sat again on the deck. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the water and turning the sky into something worthy of a canvas. I didn't scroll social media. I didn't check Talia's Instagram. I didn't wonder if they missed me. Because you don't long for people who served you shame and called it tradition. What I did do was open the folder my attorney had sent, labeled Prenuptial Agreement, Execution Clause, and flip through the details. The language was ironclad. Every account remained mine. Every asset traced directly to my name. And most importantly, there were no claims to future earnings. That document was a quiet wall, protecting everything I'd built from everyone who thought they could someday knock. They could try to rewrite the story later. Say they were caught off guard, that they didn't mean it, that family dinners get emotional. But truth has a timestamp. And last night, they said everything they needed to say clearly, proudly, cruelly. Talia didn't stop them. That was her choice. Now she'd live with the silence that followed it. I ended the night with one last walk along the shoreline, barefoot in the sand, letting the waves nip at my toes. Each step forward felt like a chapter turning. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't broken. I was done. And in that clarity, I made a quiet promise. I would never again explain myself to people who were too arrogant to ask, too insecure to listen, and too blind to see. They didn't know I left with everything. But I did. It took exactly 3 weeks for the silence to break. For 21 days, there wasn't a single word from Talia. Not a text. Not a call. Not a let's talk. I assumed that was the direction we were both headed, separate, silent, final. And I was fine with that. I wasn't waiting by the phone. I wasn't refreshing inboxes. I was building. While they let silence grow like mold, I was laying down the next phase of the life they never bothered to ask about. The tech firm in Boston had finally come around on the offer. We'd been circling each other for months, but now that my fintech platform's growth chart had gone vertical, their tone shifted from skeptical to eager. I was leading the acquisition talks myself, hands-on, because I trusted no one else to speak the language of hunger the way I did. I spent my days on video calls with lawyers and CFOs, toggling between dashboards and forecasts that made one thing clear. We were just getting started. The Miami rental project was also moving. 72 units under redevelopment, most of them already leased on pre-sales. I'd created an ecosystem: rent, manage, reinvest. My team was young but sharp, and they understood my rules. No cutting corners, no flashy nonsense, and no one disrespects where we came from. It was during one of those long days, mid-negotiation with our legal counsel, that my phone vibrated off the edge of my desk. 16 missed calls, all from unknown number. At first, I assumed it was spam. Real estate brokers trying to sell me another coastal property. Lenders I didn't need. Journalists fishing for a comment now that my name had started to circulate among mid-cap circles. I ignored it. Then came the voicemail. I pressed play, casually sipping from a bottle of spring water, ready to delete the moment I heard nonsense. But the voice that came through the speaker froze me in place. Gerald, it's Joelle. The pause she left after her name felt loaded, rehearsed. Like she'd said it 10 different ways in her head before finally recording this version. Listen, we really need to talk. I know things escalated, but there's a lot you don't understand. It's urgent. Please just call us back. It's important. She sounded like someone who had been practicing sincerity but hadn't quite mastered it. I deleted the message without finishing it. Not out of anger, out of clarity. Joelle, the woman who called me trash with wine in her hand and smirks at the ready, now wanted my attention. The same Joelle who couldn't look me in the eye unless it was to cut me down. I leaned back in my chair and laughed. Not bitterly, not loudly. Just a short, real laugh. Because the cycle was so predictable. The moment people realize you're not drowning like they hoped, they pretend they were the ones throwing the life raft. I didn't respond. Because I was busy. Busy finalizing contracts worth more than their combined net worth. Busy overseeing branding updates for the Miami complex. Busy hiring staff for the support center we were opening in Atlanta to give underrepresented youth a foot in the door into finance. Busy doing the work they never saw but now suddenly respected. But they weren't done. The calls kept coming. Unknown. Blocked. Voicemails growing more emotional by the day. Talia's been going through a lot, Joelle said in one. She hasn't been herself. Please, if you just let us explain. Where was that urge to explain when Frederick called me a lowlife over dinner? When Talia sat in silence and let the heat sear me while she poured another glass of Pinot? When they made their judgment a family activity? Now it was urgent? Now it mattered? I sat at my desk, surrounded by glass walls and ocean light, and thought about how different this office was from the basement where I started. Back when I coded alone, grinding through investor rejections, surviving on instant noodles and hope. None of them were there. Not Talia. Not Joelle. Not Frederick. The only thing they'd ever contributed to my journey was a dinner invitation dressed as an ambush. So no, I didn't respond. Instead, I responded to the needs that mattered. My company, my team, my vision. That same day, I approved 2 new hires and pushed forward the Series B planning. I gave Rafik the green light to expand our infrastructure. We were scaling now, not surviving. Every day I ignored their calls was another day I invested in people who respected me. Later that evening, Miles messaged me. Heard from Tech Tribe. They want to feature you in this self-made issue. You in? I replied with a simple, yes. Let's show them what silence looks like when it builds instead of begs. Still, part of me understood what was happening. The panic, the sudden sweetness, the attempts to reach out. It wasn't about guilt. It wasn't about missing me. It was about realization that they'd miscalculated, that the man they dismissed without hesitation was the same man now being pursued by magazines, venture capitalists, and global investors. And they wanted back in. But here's the thing. People don't get to mock your roots and then ask for shade when the tree finally grows. The next morning, while sipping coffee by the water, my phone buzzed again. This time, a text from a new number. Please, for Talia's sake, just let us talk. Just one meeting. No yelling. We promise. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Not because I was tempted to reply, but because the audacity still managed to surprise me. I tapped the screen, blocked, closed the curtains, and returned to my coffee. Because while they were counting on me being bitter, what they never expected was that I'd moved on. Completely. I had just finished my second espresso when the intercom buzzed. Mr. Stone, the concierge said, his voice a shade more hesitant than usual. There's an older couple downstairs. They say they're your in-laws. I didn't answer right away. I let the words hang in the space between us like steam from my cup. The ocean wind drifted in through the open balcony doors, soft and constant. I hadn't expected them to show up. Not like this. Not unannounced. But part of me wasn't surprised either. This was the next phase of their performance, a surprise act, improvised poorly. Tell them I'm unavailable, I said, calmly. And remind them this building doesn't allow unregistered guests past the lobby. The concierge paused. Understood, sir. I placed the mug on the railing and turned to the screen mounted discreetly beside the wine rack. The security feed flicked on. There they were. Frederick and Joelle, standing by the concierge desk, looking out of place in a space built for people who respected boundaries. Frederick looked agitated, hands balled into fists at his sides, pacing like he was preparing for a courtroom cross-examination. Joelle clutched her purse in one hand, the other dabbing at her cheek with a tissue. It might have been real emotion, or just good theater. Either way, I wasn't buying a ticket. Frederick leaned in, said something sharp to the concierge, then turned and stared up toward the elevator like he could glare through 15 floors and make me come down. I didn't move. I watched. You see, they didn't recognize this world because they never believed I could build one. They saw ambition in others, but never in me. I wasn't Ivy League. I wasn't polished by their definition. I didn't wear the right last name or memorize the right wines. To them, I was a stray dog their daughter foolishly tried to housebreak. Disposable. Replaceable. But what stood between us now, glass walls, black granite floors, beachfront elevation, and 24-hour security, wasn't just concrete and marble. It was proof. Proof that I didn't need them. That I never did. They had come, of course, not because of love, not even remorse. No. They had come because they saw the headlines, heard the whispers, maybe caught wind of my name being mentioned in tech circles where real influence lived. They had come because silence didn't mean failure. It meant progress they weren't invited to witness. My phone buzzed again. Concierge, one more time. Sir, the woman says she's very sorry. She's asking if you'll just come down for 5 minutes. I almost laughed. Joelle hadn't blinked when she called me a stain on the family image. Now she wanted 5 minutes? That's the problem with people like her. They think apologies are a currency they can spend after overdrawing on cruelty. Let them know this is a residential tower, not a revolving door, I replied. They can leave the same way they came in. He hesitated. You want me to escort them out? No, I said. Just let them sit in it. Give them time to understand what it means when the answer is no. I clicked the screen off and walked into the living room. My phone pinged again, this time from Miles. Investor signed. Dubai's in. Deal closed. Congrats. I smiled. That was the world I lived in now. Quiet wins. Digital contracts. And momentum no one could stop. I returned to my office, clean lines, sand-colored wood, soft leather seating, and a single framed photo on the shelf. Me and my late grandfather, the only man who ever told me I didn't need to dress like a king to become one. He worked as a mechanic for 40 years, never owned a suit, but taught me more about dignity than any of Talia's relatives ever could. His lessons lived in this space, in every contract I signed, in every boundary I enforced. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. I turned the security feed back on. Frederick was now seated stiffly on the lobby bench, one leg bouncing in impatience. Joelle was crying, or pretending to. Either way, it wasn't my job to decipher it. I owed them nothing. Not my time. Not my presence. Not the comfort of a second chance. And maybe that's what bothered them most. This wasn't the version of me they thought would emerge after rejection. They expected a man broken enough to beg his way back in, to make himself smaller for their approval, to wear shame like a uniform. But that man never existed. Not really. I was simply quiet while I worked. Meek while I learned. I let them talk because I knew one day I wouldn't have to explain. I'd just live, and that life would be loud enough. Eventually, the concierge called once more. "They're leaving now, sir." I didn't ask if they said anything. I didn't watch them go. I just nodded, turned off the feed, and resumed my work. Because when you're building something that lasts, you don't stop for the people who never showed up when it mattered. They had their chance. Now, they'd have to sit with the fact that I built a world they didn't believe in, and they would never be part of it. Talia called just after sunset. I was standing barefoot on the deck, a glass of cold water in hand, watching the last streaks of gold burn out over the horizon. The ocean was calm, like it always was in the evening, pulling in light and giving nothing back. I didn't expect her name to light up my phone again. Not after 3 weeks of silence followed by her parents' lobby ambush. But there it was, blinking like it still had rights. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. "Hello." For a moment, all I could hear was breathing. Hesitant, shallow. Then her voice, softer than I remembered, like she thought gentleness might serve as an apology. "I didn't know they were going to say that to you." I didn't speak. Not yet. I wanted her to hear the quiet she left behind. The kind of silence you create when you allow someone you supposedly love to be devoured in front of you. They got carried away," she continued, like it was a mild outburst. Like I'd merely been passed over for dessert, not dignity. "Carried away?" I finally said, each word like a flat stone skipped across still water. "Talia, they didn't lose their temper. They unloaded years of how they really felt." She exhaled. "I know. You do?" "Yes." Another beat of silence. "Then let me ask you something," I said, stepping back inside, walking slowly to the window where my reflection stared back at me, unbothered, unfazed. "Did you defend me?" It was the simplest question in the world. Just 3 words. But it split everything open. The line went quiet. Then came her whisper. "No, that was it. No excuse. No stammered rationale. Just the naked truth, the kind of truth that hits harder than any insult because it confirms what your instincts had been screaming all along." "No," she said again. I froze. I didn't know what to say. "You didn't have to know what to say, Talia. You just had to choose me." "I know." I leaned against the wall, letting the cool air brush against my skin. I closed my eyes for a second, remembering her hand in mine at our wedding. How tightly she held it. How her voice shook when she said, "I do." I thought we were a team. I thought even when the world turned sharp, we'd shield each other. But she let me stand there alone. You can't unsee that. You can't unfeel it. "You know the thing about betrayal?" I said finally. "It's not always a knife. Sometimes it's just the person who's supposed to catch you stepping aside." She sniffled. "I've been replaying it over and over in my head. I was so ashamed. I didn't know how to call you after. And when my parents came to see you, I thought maybe." "No," my voice hardened. "Don't let yourself off the hook by acting like their visit was for me. That was about them trying to erase the cost of their arrogance. Not to mend anything. And not once did I hear from you until now." "I didn't know how," she whispered. "You picked silence," I said. "And silence during betrayal is just as loud as the betrayal itself. I never wanted it to go like this. But it did." I walked to the bar cart, poured myself a splash of whiskey neat. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted to mark this moment, the death of an illusion. The moment I stopped pretending the woman I married was still beside me. "Talia," I said, more gently now, "you don't lose a good man. You erase him. And then you wonder why your world suddenly goes quiet." She didn't respond. "Because what do you say to that? What do you say when you realize you let a fire die and only now miss the warmth?" "I wasn't asking for a war," I continued. "I was asking for one word. One sentence. A look. Something that said, 'He's mine, and you won't disrespect him in front of me.' But instead, I got silence. And that silence said everything. She sniffled again, but I didn't move. I didn't comfort. That wasn't my job anymore. I still love you, she said. I didn't answer, because I knew love wasn't the issue. Loyalty was. You can love someone and still abandon them. You can love someone and still be the reason they never look at you the same again. I hope you find peace, I said finally. Her breath caught. Is this goodbye? I don't think it needs a name, I said. It's just clarity. And I hung up. I stood there for a long moment, the glass warm in my hand, the sea stretching out beyond the windows like something infinite. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt weightless. Like I had finally stopped dragging around the version of her I kept trying to make fit the reality in front of me. That night, I didn't check my phone again. I didn't write about it in a journal or listen to sad music or look through old photos. I closed the windows, turned off the lights, and slept. Alone, but not lonely, because I'd finally told the truth out loud. And the truth was simple. She let it happen. And I would never let that happen to me again. The celebration wasn't loud. That's never been my style. No flashy champagne towers, no influencers snapping photos to prove they were in the room. Just my team, tight-knit, driven, and loyal. We gathered at my Miami penthouse, the second one I bought this year, this one with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the marina and a rooftop garden I designed myself. Soft jazz played in the background. The lights were low, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and citrus, and laughter echoed from the terrace where we toasted to the kind of win that doesn't come with confetti, but with weight. 12 million, Rafik said, holding up his glass. Seed round closed. Valuation tripled. And the board didn't blink. They know what we're building. He turned toward me with that half-smile he always gave when he was proud. To the man they underestimated. Everyone raised their glasses. To Gerald. The clink of crystal followed. I nodded, said thank you. But inside, I was somewhere else. I wasn't thinking about term sheets or market shares. I wasn't basking in the numbers. I was thinking about how not long ago, I was being told straight to my face that I didn't belong, that I was unworthy of the very success now being toasted by people who knew what it cost to build from nothing. I didn't bring up Talia or her parents. Not here. Not now. Not because I'd forgotten. Because they no longer earned the space. Their words, their judgments, their absence, they weren't fuel anymore. Just history. A chapter closed, sealed, and boxed away on a shelf I'd never revisit. Later that night, after everyone had left, I sat by the pool on the rooftop. The city stretched out in twinkles beneath me, the water still, a mirror to my new life. I opened my phone and scrolled through the unread voicemails. Another one from Joelle. This one had a subject line in the transcription, an apology and a request. I tapped play. Gerald, this is Joelle. Again, I know you're probably tired of hearing from me, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly. For the things I said. For the way I treated you. I was wrong. A pause. We've had time to think. And we miss you. Talia misses you. Frederick does too, though he won't say it out loud. We never meant to hurt you. We didn't understand you. Not the way we should have. Then the shift. We were hoping you might be able to help. Frederick's investment property hasn't performed like we thought. We're facing some tax challenges. It's complicated, but we're struggling. And we thought, if there was any chance you'd be willing to talk, we'd be grateful. There it was. The real reason. Not regret. Not reconciliation. But access. I stood and walked inside, the message still echoing in my head. I knew what I needed to do. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I owed it to the man I was 3 months ago. The one who walked away from that dinner table stripped bare, humiliated, and discarded. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and composed a short message. Joelle, I'm sorry for your situation, but I won't fund comfort for those who mock my foundation. I wish you peace, from a distance. Send. No signature. No flourish. Just the boundary they never believed I was strong enough to draw. After that, I called Miles. Gerald, he answered, half expecting a late update. I need you to run a scan on Frederick and Joelle's real estate holdings. See what properties are exposed. If they go under, I want to be ready to bid through one of our shells. You want the assets? No, I said. I want the power of the option. That's all. Got it. I ended the call, walked into the master suite, and stared out at the moonlit coast. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. There's a difference. See, when you grow up with nothing, people assume you'll always be grateful just to be invited in. They don't expect you to say no, to build something better, to walk away not in anger, but in peace. Apologies, real or not, don't equal access. They don't wipe the slate. They don't dissolve the sting of words meant to break you. Forgiveness is personal, but access? That's earned. And they lost the key. That night, I slept well. Not because I'd won anything, but because I finally stopped trying to prove I deserved a seat at tables that were never set for me in the first place. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning, right as the sun broke over the Atlantic and spilled light across the glass walls of my Miami office. I was barefoot, standing on the marble tiles with a mug in my hand that read self-made, a gift from Rafik after our last round closed. The email subject line was simple, "It's live." And underneath, the link to the feature I'd done quietly with Monarch Weekly. I clicked. The Quiet Architect, How Gerald Stone Built a $45 million Empire After Being Disowned. My name. My story. My picture, me on the deck of my Florida home, when tugging gently at my white shirt, bare feet against the warm wood, eyes calm and focused. No watch. No chain. No posing. Just presence. The way I always wanted to be seen, not loud, not flashy, but undeniable. The article was everything I asked for. No dramatics. No sob story. Just facts. They detailed the launch of my fintech platform, the acquisitions, the Miami housing initiative. They even included a quote from my first investor. He was the kind of guy who didn't blink when told no. He just kept building. Now we follow his lead. I scrolled slowly, taking in the paragraphs like chapters I'd never had the time to write. There was a part about my upbringing. How I was raised by a single mother who worked nights at a hospital and still made time to teach me how to read stock tickers. How I once coded the foundation of our current platform in the back of a mechanic shop I rented for $200 a month. How I wore the same pair of black dress shoes to every meeting for 3 years straight because I believed respect should come from ideas, not labels. Then came the quote that would live far longer than the article itself. "You don't have to clap for me now," I told the journalist, because the silence taught me how to clap for myself. That was it. The heart of everything. The anthem for every boy who'd ever been told to wait his turn by people who never intended to give him one. I finished reading, set the mug down, and stepped out onto the balcony. The wind hit my face gently, like a quiet nod from the universe. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. Buzzed again. Then came the screenshot from Maya. My younger sister, the only blood relative I trusted completely. She didn't say a word. Just sent the image. A group chat. Talia's family. Joel, he's embarrassing us. Frederick, why does he always need an audience? Brielle, we were just trying to help. He's being dramatic. I stared at it, letting the hypocrisy roll over me like cold water. Embarrassing them? After everything they said. After the dinner where they ripped through my dignity like it was wrapping paper. Now they were the victims? Now they were hurt by the story being told. I let out a low, humorless laugh. Because they still didn't get it. This wasn't a performance. I didn't do the article to shame them. I did it to honor the version of myself that survived their dismissal. I didn't write it to gloat. I wrote it because my silence had been misinterpreted for too long. They thought I'd disappeared, but I was just busy building a life they'd never be invited into. Maya followed up with another message. Maya, just wanted you to see it. But don't let it get to you. You look like a boss in that photo. I smiled and texted her back. Me. It doesn't get to me. It just reminds me why I stopped explaining. Because what they couldn't stand wasn't the success. It was that I no longer needed their validation to claim it. Later that afternoon, Miles called. The article's gone viral in our circles. I'm getting outreach from international investors. That Australian fund? They're ready to meet. Good, I said, flipping through a portfolio of design drafts for the upcoming Miami units. Keep the momentum going. Oh, and your old professor from state reached out too. Said he's proud. I paused, surprised. Professor Garrison? Yup, the one who told you to consider a more realistic career path. He says he always saw your potential. I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep and exhausted. Of course he did. That evening, as the article continued to ripple across networks and circles and social feeds, I sat back and thought about the younger version of me. The one who used to knock on the doors of possibility, hoping someone inside would care enough to open them. No one did. So I built my own house. And now, The people who once slammed the door in my face were upset they didn't have a key. There was a knock at my door. Not metaphorical. Actual. It was Rafik. Had to stop by, he said, stepping inside. Brought wine. We stood on the balcony, the city lights below like a blanket of stars fallen to earth. They saw it, he asked. They saw it. And they called it embarrassing. He snorted. They're mad they weren't the ones being interviewed. That's all. I nodded. They wanted the ending to the story to be their redemption arc. But you're the one who changed. Exactly. Rafik poured the wine. So what now? I swirled the glass once, slow and thoughtful. Now? We finish what we started. We expand. We fund others who look like us. We make it so the next Gerald doesn't have to sit through a dinner like that to be taken seriously. And they can keep pretending they didn't read it. Because here's the truth, they read every word. Twice. And then again. Because nothing stings more than watching the man you thought was disposable rise without reaching back. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to yell. I just needed to live. Louder. Cleaner. Unapologetically. The next morning, my inbox was full, VC interest, speaking invitations, requests for mentorship from young founders who said my story felt like theirs. But one email stood out. From info@whitestonepropertygroup.com subject. Opportunity for collaboration Frederick's company. I opened it. Gerald, after reading your article, we'd be interested in discussing a potential collaboration opportunity regarding our upcoming multifamily units. Your recent work in Miami aligns well with our next project. Please let us know if you'd be open to a meeting. Warm regards, Whitestone Development Group. No mention of the dinner. No mention of his words. Just business. I stared at the screen, then drafted my reply. Frederick, I appreciate your interest. However, I reserve partnerships for those who respected me before the headlines. Best, Gerald said. I closed my laptop, walked to the balcony, and looked out over the ocean. They saw the article. They pretended not to. But that's the thing about truth. Once it's out, it doesn't need permission to echo. And I wasn't done speaking. The call came from my lawyer on a Thursday morning, just as I was stepping out of a strategy session with my advisory board. We'd finalized expansion into 3 new markets, and the team was buzzing with that particular kind of momentum that only happens when risk turns into reality. Everyone shook hands, slapped backs, and talked next steps. I was walking past the curved glass wall of the conference room, sun streaking across the polished floor, when my phone buzzed with his name, Andrew Kellman, ESQ. Gerald, he said, his tone businesslike, but with an edge of surprise. You're not going to believe this. I've learned not to be surprised, I replied, stepping into my private office and closing the door behind me. Well, he exhaled. Apparently Frederick's financial advisor reached out. They're hoping you might be open to extending a family loan to assist with an ongoing property tax issue on one of his older commercial buildings. Midtown. Over-leveraged. I guess the new tenants didn't pan out. I stared out at the ocean from the office window. Calm waves. Clear sky. No turbulence here. Only in their world. And what exactly are they asking? I said, a bridge loan. Short term. Low interest, if possible. They used the phrase, and I quote, as a gesture of family solidarity. That made me laugh. Family solidarity? That's rich. Andrew chuckled. I thought you might say that. Here's my response. I said, walking slowly back toward my desk. Send them my corporate lending rates. No adjustments. No favors. No shortcuts. Business only? Exactly. There was a pause on the line, like he was weighing whether to ask the next question. You sure about that? You don't want to use this as leverage. I shook my head. No leverage. Just distance. This isn't a chess match. It's a lesson. And I'm not in the business of giving discounts to people who disrespected the architect of the foundation they now want to stand on. He let out a slow breath. Understood. I'll forward the terms. I ended the call and sat for a moment, fingers interlocked, elbows resting on the edge of my desk. I wasn't angry, not even mildly irritated. I was just steady. Like someone who finally understood that forgiveness is not the same thing as access. I could wish them peace from afar. I could even let go of the wound. But I didn't owe them proximity. I didn't owe them the privilege of re-entering a world they tried to laugh me out of. They taught me boundaries. Now they'd get to live with them. I sent a quick message to Miles. Frederick's team reached out. Want a loan? I gave Andrew the green light to respond with our official lending terms. No variation. Miles, copy that. The audacity never ends. Me, it ends where the contract starts. I leaned back and exhaled. The kind of exhale that comes when the wind is finally at your back, not in your face. Everything I'd built, every sleepless night, every rejection, every skipped vacation, every moment I chose growth over comfort, it had brought me here. And they wanted to walk through a door they once tried to bar me from. I was done handing out keys. That evening, I made myself dinner. Grilled salmon, sautéed asparagus, quinoa, and a glass of Cabernet from a vineyard I invested in last fall. No chef, no staff, just me and the kind of peace you don't find, you earn. I ate outside on the terrace, the breeze brushing past me like a whisper of gratitude. When the meal was done, I sat back and looked out over the darkening water. I thought about the boy I used to be, the one who wore thrifted suits to networking events, the one who took the bus across town for coding boot camps because he couldn't afford Uber, the one who kept showing up even when no one clapped. And then I thought about Frederick, Joelle, Talia, all of them sitting in their manufactured little empire, built on lineage and entitlement, watching mine rise out of the very dirt they once kicked in my direction. I didn't hate them, but I no longer saw them as anything more than a part of my origin story. Just then, my phone buzzed again. Voicemail. Joelle. I didn't press play. I already knew the cadence, regret wrapped in flattery, apology dipped in hope. It was always the same tune. We didn't mean it. We didn't know. Can you help us now? But that's not how it works. You don't curse the seed and expect shade from the tree. They wanted my resources, not my redemption. They wanted a pass, not a path. They wanted access to the benefits of who I'd become, without reconciling with the pain they caused to get there. I stood, emptied my wine into the sink, and walked upstairs. On my nightstand was a framed quote Maya gave me the day after I walked out of that infamous dinner. You're not hard to love. They're just not soft enough to try. I stared at it for a long time before turning out the light. The next morning, Andrew followed up. They've declined your loan terms, he said. Apparently, they think it's predatory. I smiled. Nothing predatory about transparency. That's the rate we offer to any outside entity. Exactly, he said. Just thought you'd want to know. I didn't reply, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew everything had already been said, without me ever raising my voice. Forgiveness is not a revolving door. It's a one-way street you decide whether or not to walk down. I chose to walk forward. They stayed behind. And that decision? It's the most peace I've ever known. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, and sealed with the kind of care people reserve for wedding invitations or final farewells. It wasn't marked with a return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly looped, controlled cursive that had once written my name on anniversary cards and place settings. Joelle. She had taken the time to sit down, pick a pen, and write something by hand, as if ink could do what voicemail and shame hadn't. It was waiting in a stack of forwarded mail on the corner of my desk, just behind a few real estate tax forms and a catalog from a furniture studio in Brooklyn. Corinne, my assistant, had placed it neatly in a personal folder. I hadn't touched it in 3 days. I'd seen it, acknowledged it, and moved on until now. Something about the silence in my home that night made it louder than usual. No meetings, no deadlines, no investor calls. Just the quiet hum of success breathing through a space too clean for drama. I took the envelope and carried it with me to the back deck. The moon was out, casting silver on the waves below. I sat down on the teak bench, sliced the seal open with the edge of my index finger, and unfolded the note inside. 3 pages. Handwritten. Neatly dated in the top right corner. Gerald, we just wanted better for Talia. I know how that sounds, but it's the truth. We misunderstood your path. We didn't realize what you were building or how hard you were working. I won't excuse what we said to you that night. I won't insult your intelligence with justifications. But I will say this. We were wrong. I stopped reading. Because that line right there, it wasn't for me. It was for them. They were wrong, but not just because they judged me prematurely. They were wrong because they thought I would stay in the box they tried to shove me into. They thought I would seek their approval forever, that I would shape myself to fit their vision of worthy. But I never wanted their vision. I had my own. I continued reading, slower now. We've watched from a distance. The articles, the interviews, the Miami projects, the speaking engagements. I saw the photo of you on the deck. I saw the smile that didn't need anyone else to validate it. And it humbled me. There was something honest in that part. I'll give her that. Joelle never lacked intelligence. She knew how to craft words that sounded genuine, even if the motivation behind them was muddied. But then came the turn. We'd love to see the beach house. Not because of what it represents, but because we'd like to see you again. In your space. In your world. Maybe, somehow, start again. We miss Talia's smile. We miss having you in our lives. And there it was. Not me. Not truly. The house. The view. The proximity to something they no longer controlled. It wasn't affection. It was curiosity. Not apology. Just strategic nostalgia. They didn't want me. They wanted proof they still had a path back into the orbit of my success. That they could slide back in through the side door, soften the past with pleasantries, and be seen beside me long enough to look gracious by association. I folded the letter once, neatly. Then I stood. I walked back inside, placed the letter on my office shredder, and fed the first page through. I watched the blades tear through the cursive without hesitation. Second page. Gone. Third page. Gone. There was something freeing about it. No drama. No resentment. Just closure in motion. Then I picked up my phone. "Corinne," I said when she answered. "Yes, Mr. Stone? Let's schedule the Forbes follow-up shoot." "Of course. Same location as last time?" "Here," I said. "But I want a minimalist coastal vibe this time. Morning light. Clean lines. Nothing performative. Just presence." "I'll get them here by next Tuesday." "Perfect." I ended the call and stood in the silence for a moment. In the quiet hum of an empire that didn't need anyone's applause to stand tall. They wanted to see the house. But if they wanted to see me, they could see me from the magazine rack at Whole Foods. The next morning, the media team arrived just after sunrise. The photographer, a woman named Emery I'd worked with before, adjusted her lenses as the sun climbed the horizon. I stood barefoot on the stone steps outside the back doors, dressed in a soft gray sweater and navy slacks. No tie. No props. Just me, as I was. "This shot," she said. "It says everything. The light, the stillness, the strength." "Good," I said. "Let it speak louder than I ever did." The article came out a week later. This one wasn't about numbers or deals. It was about what came after the silence. About what it looked like to be unbothered, not bitter. Healed, not hardened. There was a quote they pulled from my off-camera conversation with Emery that I hadn't even realized they were recording. "Success isn't revenge. It's refusing to live small just because someone else handed you a shallow opinion." That one stuck. The phone didn't stop buzzing for days. Requests, DMs, emails, students from my old neighborhood, messages from people I'd never met but who saw themselves in the arc of my story. But the only people who didn't reach out again? Talia, Joelle, Frederick. They went quiet. Not because they finally understood the damage, but because they realized the gate they'd once guarded no longer led to me. I built something else. Farther, higher, and out of reach. The final letter came 6 months to the day after I walked out of that dinner. This time, it wasn't scented. No gold foil on the edges. No attempts at charm. Just plain white paper in a nondescript envelope, folded with the kind of weight that let me know it wasn't sent on impulse. It had been written slowly. Measured. The kind of letter you write when you've finally accepted what's already gone. It arrived on a Friday morning, dropped off by a private courier. No return address again, but this time I didn't need to check the handwriting. It wasn't Joelle's. It was Talia's. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the marble kitchen island beside a bowl of ripe oranges, poured myself a cup of coffee, and stepped onto the deck as the tide rolled in just past the dunes. The breeze was different that morning. Softer. More forgiving. It carried no echoes from that night, no ghost of the word, lowlife, no sting of being told I was unworthy. Just wind. And peace. When I came back inside, I picked up the letter and sat down in the armchair facing the sea. I unfolded the page carefully, like it might crumble in my hands if I moved too quickly. I braced myself, not for hope, but for honesty. "Gerald, this is the last letter I'll send. I don't expect a reply. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know we were wrong. All of us. Me most of all. I watched you become something extraordinary, and I didn't lift a finger when they tried to reduce you. I stood by and let the people I loved tear into the man who loved me. I convinced myself that silence wasn't betrayal, but it was. And I'm sorry. I know you're gone now, in every way that matters. But if there's any space in your life, any corner of it where we can still exist, I'd be grateful. Talia." I folded it back slowly. No theatrics. No grand apology dripping with sentiment. Just clarity. But clarity comes late, sometimes too late to fix what silence destroyed. I set the letter down and stared out the window. I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt done. The kind of done that doesn't need noise. I had already moved on. That chapter had been closed long before this ink dried. The truth was, I had loved her once. Fiercely. But the version of her that let me stand alone while her family dismantled me in front of their dinnerware. That version died the moment she said nothing. There's no reset button for that kind of abandonment. I walked to my desk, opened a drawer, pulled out stationery I hadn't touched in over a year, and wrote the first letter I'd handwrite in a long, long time. Talia, thank you for your letter. And your honesty. It's more than I ever got when I needed it most. But I want you to know something. You taught me what it felt like to be unwanted. Truly, deeply, undeniably unwanted. That pain, the kind that makes you question your voice, your value, your very presence, it could have destroyed me. But I didn't let it. I used that silence. I let it carve tunnels in me until all that remained was clarity. I turned that pain into a fortress. And now, I live in it. Not as a prisoner, but as its architect. You are forgiven, but you will not be invited in. Because I no longer answer to the people who only clapped when I stayed small. Gerald, I sealed the envelope. No return address. No signature. No dramatic flourish. Just a line of truth that she would either respect or resent. I didn't care which. That wasn't my burden anymore. I handed the letter to Corinne with a quiet instruction. Deliver it directly. No delay. No follow-up. She nodded. No questions. That's why she was invaluable. She knew how to protect my peace. That night, I walked the shoreline alone, the tide kissing my feet with every step. The moon hung low like it was watching. I thought of all the versions of me that had once lived in other people's shadows. The boy who'd once wanted to be invited. The man who had once waited for acknowledgement. The husband who had once looked across a dinner table, desperate for someone to speak up. They were all gone. In their place was a builder, a strategist, a man who no longer needed to explain his worth to anyone who had a chance to see it and chose not to. 6 months had passed, and in that time, I had created something lasting. I wasn't just investing in real estate. I was investing in people. Underrepresented entrepreneurs who reminded me of myself, scrappy, brilliant, hungry. I launched a new initiative called StoneRise, a funding and mentorship program that would take overlooked founders and give them everything the world tried to deny them. Not just capital, but guidance, infrastructure, community. We signed our 10th mentee the same day I sent that final letter. His name was Eli, 22 years old. Built an AI logistics model out of his dorm room with nothing but a used laptop and public Wi-Fi. I met him in my office. He wore a faded gray hoodie and sat straight, nervous but focused. Why do you want to do this? I asked him. Because I'm tired of knocking on doors that were never built for me to open. I nodded. Then let's build our own. He blinked. Really? You think I fund people who wait to be picked? I leaned forward. I fund people who pick themselves. That's what legacy looked like. Not reconciliation with people who only loved the version of me they could control, but elevation of people who were born to break ceilings. I built my life from the floor of rooms I was never supposed to enter. Now, I was building doors for others. Talia's family hadn't said another word since receiving my letter, and that was fine. Sometimes the greatest peace is knowing you said everything you needed to say and never had to repeat it. The headlines stopped chasing me. The calls slowed. But my world? It expanded. I spent mornings drinking coffee on my balcony, evenings on Zoom calls with new founders, and weekends walking the beach with no one to answer to but the tide. One afternoon, as I stood barefoot in the sand, I whispered to the wind something I never had the courage to say aloud back then. They threw away trash, but I turned it into treasure. Not for them, not to prove them wrong, but because I finally learned. I was never trash. They just didn't know what value looked like when it didn't come dressed in their reflection.